be careful picking a side and going to fight for it. What we're seeing more and more is that people are very comfortable with narratives, with stories that are further and further from the truth, but that suck up all the oxygen in the room, so to speak, and prevent alternatives from getting much light, from being able to breathe, from being able to become popular. An example from recent activities would be the conspiracies around 5G and the stuff that's going on with that. A lot of people were focusing on the high band of 5G, the higher frequency range, but what folks didn't really notice was that there are 3 bands within 5G, and depending on the locale, only certain bands are being implemented, so it's not always all 3 at the same time. But the mid-band is just a slightly higher frequency than what Wi-Fi usually is. And Wi-Fi is something that's been around for a while, and most people have it in their homes, whether they like it or not, because it's convenient, and there are devices that use Wi-Fi in order to access the internet, and so on and so forth. The thing is, a few years back, there was a research project to use Wi-Fi signals in the same way that we would use light to try and create a holographic image of a space. So these researchers, and they weren't very well funded so far as I can tell, and they didn't use very advanced technology and all that kind of stuff. They basically set up a static Wi-Fi router sending out signals. Then they had a mobile antenna, and then what they would do is they basically just read the signals at different distances, and then they would layer those different distances together, and you could pretty much put together a holographic image. Now, it wasn't very high resolution, there wasn't a whole lot of detail, but you could still make out a large enough object, the centimeter size object, pretty sufficiently clear that you'd be able to tell something was there. So a human body that's obviously much bigger than a few centimeters would be something that is very easy to note. And so if you have a static place where a signal is being sent out and you have a receiving antenna and they're talking to each other on a regular basis, then the nature of the signal that's being sent can be used to kind of see what's going on in between those 2 points. Now, take that with what's being talked about with 5G, in that they have to put antennas up all over the place because of the high band. It's a very high frequency, so it doesn't penetrate objects as well as it should in comparison to the older cell phone signals. So you have to have more towers more frequently in order to be able to try and get the same coverage that past cellular services had been able to accomplish. But at the same time, again, remember that there are 3 bands, and the 2 lower bands are not the reason why they're claiming they need to put these 5G antennas up all over the place. It's the high band, the one that would have the most data transmission, but it's the one that's, that people are using to justify. So those lower bands, especially the one in the middle with Wi-Fi, if we already had technology a few years back, for people to create a rudimentary imaging device based on a Wi-Fi router and an antenna. An antenna is smaller than or about the same size as a cell phone, basically. If that technology was already out there, then there's probably going to be more advanced versions of it where there are specialized pieces of technology that are able to accomplish a higher resolution image, that are able to see things better and maybe even penetrate different kinds of materials at a better rate. So if you've now got an antenna setup that does 3 bands, but the middle band is one that is capable of producing imaging, because it's a frequency that is close enough to what this experiment was doing, then you would be able to have very high resolution images of very large amounts of space, because these antennas are going to be dotted all over the place. And as people walk around with their phones, the phones are going to talk with the antennas, and you could have one person's phone, talking with multiple antennas at the same time. There's ways for even existing Wi-Fi routers to have a separate signal or a separate channel to devices in the same room. So the idea is that you have basically a grid of sensor towers and you have people carrying around the sensors that are going to be, accepting the data and then sending it right back to the sensor tower, instead of the focus on the genetic impact or the biological impact, the safety side of things, people were derailed from seeing that there could be a huge privacy issue in that if they've got maps or could make maps, a live holographic image of a space and be able to tell who's standing where, who's doing what, and all that kind of stuff, that's the kind of thing that would feed these artificial intelligence data mining operations where they're trying to figure out more and more about us. They're trying to track more and more information. They're trying to figure out what's going on and who's doing what and all that kind of a thing. And because there was the controversy about the biological impact, which was given a lot of press and then equally debunked in very lavish fashion, nobody thought to look at the other options or look at the other bands or to figure out if there were other things that were going on. Everybody latched onto one particular, or I should say, everybody with air quotes, everybody latched onto one particular possibility, and then other possibilities, nobody's really talking about that. Or at least few enough people are talking about it that I've seen it in one location myself, and I haven't really seen anybody else talk about it. And every time I try and bring it up, I don't get that much of a response out of it, which either means people don't think it's possible, or it's just not exciting enough, or something of that sort. Either way, when the whole 5G controversy came out, to get back to kind of the original point, a lot of people were picking sides. There were a lot of YouTube videos put out, 5G is fine, or 5G is the end of the world. And the narratives that were being sold on both ends were probably false. Everybody was supposed to pick a side and then fight for it. But the reality is that those sides were prepared ahead of time. Those sides were intentionally seeded in the minds of people in order to say, hey, these are your two options that you have to pick from. Nothing else is available. There's no third path. There's no third choice. Despite the fact that if you step back from those two arguments, you'd realize there are a lot of different choices. There are a lot of different ways that such technology could be dangerous. For example, a lot of times when people try to debunk the concerns with 5G technology, they talked about it from the intended design perspective, not in the capacity of the hardware perspective. In the sense that if I only design a device to be operating within certain parameters, but then the hardware is capable of going beyond those parameters, then it doesn't really matter if it was my intent that the device operate within certain range of power or frequency or whatnot. If it's capable of going beyond that, if the actual hardware itself is capable of going beyond that, then what is it that really prevents the hardware from doing that if somebody wants it to? That's the nature of some of these discrediting videos that needs to be taken more seriously. Is how are they trying to debunk this stuff? What are they trying to say? What are they doing? And then who is their main rival? Who is it that's opposing them? And are they setting up an intentional binary that's trying to force everybody into one of two choices, neither of which is really the truth? So be careful when there's sides coming out. Be careful taking the initial story and running with it, because there's people that are both on the mainstream and in the alternative that are very comfortable selling a narrative, lying to you in order to get you to go exactly where they want you to go. Be careful. Thanks for your time. God bless. Bye-bye.